Welcome to Old Path and our Monday studies through the Old Testament. We are currently in the book of Psalms, working our way through the 119th Psalm, and we'll probably get through 3 sections of it. If this is the first time that you've joined us for this study through the Psalms, the construction of it, if you're not familiar, is 8 verses in these sections, and they're all beginning in the Hebrew. They all begin with the letter of the alphabet, working through it systematically. So you can go back to the first week that we did this, and we went through just the first 8 verses and kind of gave a little bit of a background of it. What I will do in this week, as I've done in the others, I will be putting up the letters as they appear, and then where they are in English and Hebrew. So it'll kind of help you to work through it, and I'll just leave it up on the screen. It makes more sense to do it that way. No need to look at my face. It's just better to have the grammar of it, and you can see the side-by-side comparison. In this one, we'll have an example of the as I've said in the past, the Hebrew, every single first word begins with that letter of the alphabet for the next 8 verses in that section, same letter. And it doesn't always begin in the English, and there's been one example, we'll have one today, where actually not only in the Hebrew but also in the English you'll find that the first word begins with that letter as it's laid out. That'll all make sense if you're not kind of tracking with that when you see what I put up on the screen when we start the study. So we'll do that here, but I wanted to do a couple of things real quick before we get into the text. One is to remind you, if you've been studying along with us, you do know this, but if you've just kind of come across it for the first time, the website, or the YouTube channel, we take trips to Israel and take groups there as often as we can. We had to postpone the one earlier this year because of the instability that was happening, mainly because of what was going on in the north. Today we awoke to the news, actually it was being reported last night, that the leader of Iran's helicopter had gone down, and he and I think the defense minister or foreign minister, one of the other ranking officials in the government of Iran died in a helicopter crash. And so it'll be an interesting thing to see about the stability, but also, since Iran bankrolls both Hezbollah and Hamas, it will be very interesting to see what happens with those 2 entities. And frankly, it's because of Hamas and Hezbollah that we've had to postpone the trip from earlier this year. We have it planned to go back in October, again, assuming everything is as it should be for security's sake, and that the whole of the country is open, because we pretty much go everywhere from the far north to the south, most portions of what we would consider as the really inhabited parts of Israel, what we call Beersheba. And of course, there are still people that live south of that, but that's really where the big history of it is. We will probably, coming up from the Dead Sea, we will probably hit maybe Arad and another couple of places, but we really do go north to south. And so we want to make sure that the whole country is open up. Of course, we would never go there if there were ongoing hostilities that could put us in harm's way. So we look forward to going there, and I'm hopeful that everything will be as it should be by the time that October rolls around. So if you're interested in that, once again, it's life-changing kind of a thing. I will be going with you, so if I feel that it's in any way unsafe, I'm not going there if it's unsafe. And nor would a person that I'm co-hosting it with, Jim Fletcher. He's of the same mind in this. So we want to make sure that people are safe. With that, I've got one other thing that I want to address, and I do it every once in a while, periodically, but I don't want it to become kind of redundant. What I present on this YouTube channel is straightforward, just kind of working through the scriptures and taking our time when it's necessary. And it's not always something where it has to be some tedious examination of the language. We're going through the book of Revelation on Thursdays, and there are parts of it that are going to take a good amount of time to work through that we fully understand it. And so I will jokingly say that, I hope that this isn't too much that we're going through, or we're taking too long to do things. And the feedback that I get, this is why I wanted to address this, the feedback that I get is very much appreciated. I want you to know that. So when I was in California as the senior pastor there, we were doing 3 Bible studies a week. So the morning on Sundays was one book of the Bible, Sunday nights was another book of the Bible, and then Wednesdays was another book of the Bible. So I've carried that on in the Old and New Testament in-depth studies. That's our Monday and Thursday now on this YouTube channel. But when I was in California, there was lots of feedback that I would get, and people would ask questions, and I could have a lot of interaction with the people that were there at the church. In this case, since they're just recorded, I don't have that same kind of interaction. But there are some of you, and I want to address that do take the time to either comment on the YouTube channel, whether in detail or just in a few words, and they're very encouraging to me, and I want you to know that. Every once in a while, I will get an email from someone who will go into some detail about the appreciation that they have for going through the text, and then they have questions, and they appreciate the idea that there can be a dialogue and we can go through these things. So I appreciate that the people put up this information and this feedback to me. It really does genuinely mean more than you know. So I get people that will tell me that they pray for the ministry, that they're grateful for it, and I am grateful for the people that tune in. Some people support it. But I'm not going to get into that way of somehow people will do things to try to get a viewership and monetize it. And I do want to make sure I'm careful about that. It's not my intention to make a living at this as far as the YouTube channel is concerned. So I'm not going to go through and try to do things of monetizing, and I'm not going to be doing commercials for stuff as you see some people. I'm trying to avoid all of those things. I do appreciate the people who will subscribe, and I encourage you to do so. The more views, the more subscriptions that there are, the more that there is exposure to this. And I will close with this part by just saying my only real concern about this channel and about the videos going out is that people will take the time to study through the scriptures from chapter to chapter, verse to verse, book to book. That's my only reason for doing this. And it's just what I was brought up in, and it's what I have been accustomed to, and it's the surefire way of making sure that we as believers will grow in our relationship to Him is if we take the time to study and to learn His Word. So I take that charge extremely serious. So once again, I want to thank the people who support the ministry in any way, and the encouragement that I get from people in just in writing, whether they're comments on the YouTube channel or things that come in through the email. I am eternally grateful. And if you've sometimes thought, I wonder if I should chime in or say anything, trust me, the interaction is wonderful. I look forward to it. I appreciate it. It's such an important part of the ministry, and it lets me know that people are actually tuning in and paying attention to these things, and that's hugely important as far as I'm concerned. So before we actually pull up the first verses here, I wanted to take a couple of moments to just point out something as far as the Psalms are concerned. Because again, we just kind of jump right into the verses. Now, not we, by as far as the study is concerned. I try to do a little bit of background, and before we actually look at the text, to do some setup for it. So if you've been studying with me for any length of time or with us, you'll notice that that's just kind of my MO, getting things kind of in motion before we actually look at the text. But as I read through this today, it just kind of struck me that it's a good thing for us to recognize that it's written in a very much a poetic sense. Now, of course, the Psalms oftentimes are that, but because we know so much about David's life, and we have the record of the Kings, or Samuel, whatever we have, Chronicles, where we can look back at his particular life, or in just the writings that he has in the Psalms. He writes things in a very poetic sense. There's no doubt about that. But what's really intriguing to me on a personal side of things is that though it's poetic, there clearly are things that are drawn here from his experience and his time as a man. Now, how long did it take him to write this? We don't know, but it may very well be that things that he says may have happened in times past. They could have been current. It's kind of hard to say. But as I read these things, I really do want to find myself personally in the place where when I read them, that I'm able to kind of, in my own mind and heart, it's a yes or it's an amen. I identify with this. I'm tracking with you, David, maybe putting it into my own words. How would I say this in modern English, I suppose? But nonetheless, as we read through these things, they should have that effect on us, that as we read them, they speak to the heart and to the mind. So if you've heard me speak about various passages in the Old Testament that oftentimes the church uses and quotes as though they're written to the church, there are some that are just genuinely not written to the church. They're written specifically most of the time to Judah or Judah and Israel together. But when God talks about things that are very, very specific to Israel and Judah, there's a reason why he said it. And so it's not speaking past the recipients of the writings at the time, somehow speaking to the church. And you can say that in some cases they might be universal, but we're better to apply actual verses directly from the texts that address the church. So New Testament, if you will. There are times like this, as far as the Psalms are concerned. It's not that David is writing directly, thus says the Lord, God is communicating directly to Israel. This is David, yes, the king of Israel, but he's saying these things and they have a very universal kind of a feel to them. Because it's not, again, it's David pouring out his feeling, his emotion, his recognition of things, his worship, his adoration and gratitude towards God. These are the things that he is saying. So it's not directed that God is speaking to man necessarily, but more that here David is crying out and giving thanks to God, which is why all of us can just jump right on it and say, I totally identify with that. And Lord, amen as far as that's concerned. So when we go through this, just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out, because these are really, really wonderful things that are said. And some of them, the moment that you read them, you just go, gosh, that should be exactly where my heart is at all times. So let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and we will take a look directly at the text, and we'll go through maybe 2 or 3 sections. We'll just see how much time goes by and where we get in our hour or so. I think my introduction has probably been all of about 10 minutes. So let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much for the time that we can spend in your word. We're grateful that you communicate through it, and that you have given us the comfort and the peace that comes from knowing your word and recognizing that you have written these things that we could make application to our own lives. In this case, understanding not only the historical when we can, but certainly the heart and the intent behind what David says here, that we could give that amen as we read it, because it really should be our heart as well. And so we thank you, we give you all praise, and we would ask, Lord, that you would open our eyes to what we see here in the text, and that you would be glorified in it. We give you all thanks in Jesus' name. Now, I want to put up the first one of the letters here, and it starts in verse 41. And this, if you were to look at it as you see it there on the screen, it's Vav. We would say it V-A-V or Vav. Not so heavily emphasized on the V, but that sound that's made, Vav. So as you look at the text that is here, you'll notice that on the right-hand side, every one of the verses begins, like in that blue, it's going to begin with that letter Vav, and that's that red letter that you see up in the top left. Now, in this case, this is the second one that we've had where the English does start each one of the sentences with that same word on the right-hand side of the column. It's the letter, but the word that follows begins with that letter, and it corresponds to what we would see in the English, and not always, and actually it's only the second instance where the actual English mirrors what you see on the other side in the Hebrew. And you'll notice in the other ones that we get to, the very first word in the English is not the first word in the sentence. And if that doesn't make sense, when we get to the next one, you'll understand it. But if you see, once again, the construction is that there are 8 verses that are here, and it is put forward in such a way. Again, it's David, and you can just tell that these are things going on as he surveys the world and considers what God is doing. And then again, keeping in mind, in every one of these, all but two of the entire Psalm 119, only two of the verses do not make a direct reference to his word or the law or commandments, statutes, precepts, those types of things, testimonies. He uses a variety of words which are really all supposed to carry with it that same understanding. There are slight differences in the actual words themselves, but so it's not repetitious. He just doesn't use, in a generic sense, the law, the Torah, which would be the biggest of the column that you could put there. The Torah would have in it the precepts and the commandments and the testimonies and all those different types of words that he also uses. So again, there are times when it's laws. God will say, this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do. Precepts and testimonies, things that God would proclaim or things that he would pass as kind of a judgment, and this is what is expected. All of those types of things are in there, but David uses all of it very much interchangeably because it is him just looking at, God, you have communicated to us. As a result of that, Psalm 119 is David's way of saying, I will make reference to your word and what it does in our lives, and in his in particular, to us in the application. What does it mean to us? So it's, again, a thankfulness. It's the reflecting on God's word and how he has communicated to us. We have such a larger sampling, if you will, of what God has communicated than David could have had. So he had and understood the times of the judges, and there was written record of that for him. There's also the Torah books. The book of Job would have been written by this time. But if you stop to think about it, the book of the Kings, the book of Samuel, those types of historical records, or if you think Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Ruth, all of that stuff, it's still in the future. So David's not reflecting on those things. He's not looking at the prophets. The prophets are down the road. The kings are down the road, as I have said. And then, of course, all of the New Testament. So David's pool, if you will, of resource, things that he could read about, is whatever there was historically from the time of the judges. And then, of course, he has the 5 books of Moses, and really not much else as far as the things that he could read. So when he makes reference to God's word, we're really basically thinking what you see from Genesis up through the book of Deuteronomy. And in particular, when God gives the law, he gives it beginning at Exodus and then through the next 3 books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And that's where you'll find the laws and the statutes, the precepts, those types of things that are mentioned there. So that's the background for all of this. Let's take a look at the actual text itself, and we'll just read the whole section, verses 41 to 48, and then we'll go back and look at the actual verses. So it says, "Let your mercies come also to me, O Lord, your salvation according to your word. So shall I have an answer to him who reproaches me, for I trust in your word. And take not the word of truth utterly out of my mouth, for I have hoped in your ordinances. So shall I keep your law continually forever and ever. And I will walk at liberty, for I seek your precepts. I will speak of your testimonies also before kings, and I will not be ashamed. And I will delight myself in your commandments, which I love. My hands also will I lift up to your commandments, which I love, and I will meditate upon your statutes." Now, when you look at verse 41, going back through these, once again, sometimes, almost like in the book of Proverbs, you might have from one verse to another a little bit of a disconnect in thought. There are some other times when you will have kind of like maybe 1, 2, 3 of the verses, 2 or 3 of the verses after the first one that you read initially will all kind of be related. And so it's a continuing thought from 1 to 2 to 3 verses as it goes onward. And I'll point out a few of those. And of course, it's not that they're just said randomly. There always is some kind of a continuum to it, but since he can't get the whole thought through maybe in one verse, he might spread that thought out through 2 or 3 verses, which, again, there are a couple of examples of that. But as he begins this first one, when he says, God also, come also, when it says your mercies come also to me, that come also to me is one whole phrase. And so his request is, God, would you allow it to be that all of your mercies, that they would come to me? And then he says, your salvation, and that it would be in accordance with your word. So mercies and salvation are in mind here. And again, these are kind of responses. As he reads what God's word has to say, there are these promises, things that he knows that are mercies that are implied or sometimes expressly said. God will show mercy to those that are contrite, that come to him at a time when they recognize their need for him. They maybe acknowledge whatever sin that it is and allow mercy to come in. And then salvation is deliverance, and that it would also be, as you notice here, in accordance with your word, or according to your word. So as you read that first verse, once again, we would want to be able to say, how would this be worded in our own lives? And so it's pretty much the same way. God, your word promises things like mercy and salvation, and we know the reason why those things can come. We know what the need for them is, and we know that when we cry out, we can assume, or we can expect that those would be the case. Now, it's an interesting thing when you think about him, when he says your salvation according to your word. We in the church, when we think salvation, think eternity, think of being saved, and that it's more of an eternal kind of a situation. Though when we look at it here, you can say, as David would say this, his deliverance, salvation, deliverance, could be something that was right there in the immediate. Sometimes this word can also be used in the way of just saying being taken from a place of peril right there at the moment. It can also be the idea of God's deliverance here and now, looking forward to a future time. So for us too in the church, salvation. When we say the word in the church, salvation, we know here and now that we are saved because we understand what it takes in order to be saved. So none of us, if we understand what the Bible says, if somebody asks us, are you saved? We know the answer to that question biblically. Yes, I am saved. My salvation is a settled matter because of the work of Jesus Christ, and I've accepted the forgiveness that's offered to me through his shed blood. That's the salvation. I know that I'm saved here and now. I've been delivered from the bondage of sin and death. That is an eternal consequence, that I know that I will spend my eternity face to face with him, the one who has saved me. So there's no uncertainty about what's future or even present. So that's just that wonderful thing. David would say the same thing. David did not have to wonder whether or not he would be preserved and saved. He already knew the answer to that question, though he didn't understand how sin would have a final resolution. David couldn't have understood that. We, on the other hand, do, because we understand what Jesus has done. So again, this idea that we can kind of put into our own words these things that we understand. So he says, Lord, may this be the case. Let your mercies come also to me, O Lord, your salvation according to your word. So shall I have an answer to him who reproaches me, for, here's why, because I trust in your word. So this is a desire that he wants to see as well. Could we have an answer to the person who reproaches? And that's the mockery, the scorn, the hatred that there is towards those people who would believe what they believe because they stand upon the promises of God's word. And really, if you look at this, of all the things that could be said about this psalm, it is that David rests and trusts in the promises of God, the things that he has communicated. And so as a result of that, he wants to be able to, at all times, take that place of a posture. If it's defensive, offensive, whatever it may be, there's that assurance, knowing that we stand upon ground that does not shift under our feet. We have an absolute ability to know that when we ask something of God, that it is absolutely something that we can stand upon as sure. So he says, so will I, or so shall I have an answer for him who reproaches me. The assumption is there will be people who will mock and ridicule and that will have reproach or disdain for him. So shall I have an answer. He doesn't want to take that quietly. I will answer whatever it is that is said against me in way of reproach, and here's how he would do it, because I have trust in your word. Not only that will you give that to me, or that I can hide under the shadow of your wings, as using some of David's terminology, but that there's also an answer that is in the text. Why would someone reproach us? Why would somebody have something really harmful to say? Well, it's because we trust in what God's word has to say. At the same time, we want to be able to reference that word and know for sure that God is able to make good on his promises. Verse 43, take not the word of truth utterly out of my mouth, for I have hoped in your ordinances. So this idea, never let it be a time when your word is not something that is upon my speech, in my mouth. And that idea that I've staked my entire existence on the truth found in your word, let it never escape or be gone from my mouth. Don't take it from him. And once again, this is not something that I believe David says with any kind of uncertainty, as though God would in some punitive way stop communicating to David that David would cease saying these things in the verbal sense. Notice it says, don't allow them to escape. It's don't take them from me. And so once again, it's something I don't think any of us genuinely have to worry about. It's again said in the poetic sense. As long as I'm in fellowship with the Lord, I don't have to worry about his word not being upon my lips and being spoken, because he's promised that he would be there with me. We don't say any of the things that we do based upon our own wisdom and knowledge. It's because of the prompting and the work of the Holy Spirit. So he says this, the second part of that, for I have hoped in your ordinances. And that's the hope with expectation. That is the hope. It's not an uncertainty. It's a hope of eventually, whenever that time comes, I know that I can have the anticipation and knowing that there will be a fulfillment. So verse 44, so shall I keep your law, and that's the idea of holding it to himself. I'll hold it, guard it, keep it, and do so in a continual manner, not just when it's convenient or easy, but at all times. And he says forever, even forever. And then he says, and this one I love, I will walk at liberty, for I seek your precepts. So if you look at this kind of in reverse, the second part of verse 45, since David walks in the precepts of God, the principles, the things outlined there in the text, when he talks about I will walk at liberty, it means a freedom, absolutely, but in the literal sense of the word, it means in wide open spaces, not confined, not in a place of indecision. It's just an open field, and I'm able to go out into all of it. There's no constraint. So again, if we want to take a look at what David would say, we want to try to put it into our own words. We would want to be able to say kind of the same thing, looking to God and saying, because of what you've revealed to me in your word, God, I don't feel pressed in. I don't feel confined. I feel complete liberty. I feel a complete freedom. I've been taken away from the constraints of this world. I've been set free. That's the kind of a mentality that David has behind him. And it's only because the only way that he understands this freedom or being put at liberty is because God's word has produced that in him, and he recognizes that that's the promise offered to him. So I will speak of your testimonies, verse 46, also before kings, and I will not be ashamed. So there's that sense of I won't have to worry about being put to silence. I won't keep silent. I won't feel any shame, or for some reason, think about this. There are times we think of it as shamed, but we might not say what we want to say about the Lord around people for fear of what they might say. In this case, David is not in that place at all. I will say it before kings. Now, David would be able to say he's also a king, so these are contemporaries to him. And in most cases, at his pinnacle, they would all be lesser kings. He's the king of the children of Israel. When he's walking rightly with God, there is no one like him. And so David would be able to say, I will say this without shame, without fear, without embarrassment. I will proclaim you to kings. I'll make you known. And boy, what a challenge that is for us too. So I'll speak of your testimonies also before kings. When I'm before them, they will hear these things, and I will never be ashamed of it. Verse 47, I will delight myself in your commandments, which I love. So that love for the word of God, once again, just very straightforward, easy for us to understand. And then verse 48, and my hands also I will lift up to your commandments, which I love. and I will meditate upon your statutes. Now, this first part of this is really kind of a cool thing. The idea of lifting up hands. And I know it's something in some churches you see it, other churches you don't see it, but really it's more of a posture kind of a thing where it's in a sense of worship and prayer and adoration. The lifting up of hands really is kind of contrasted by the person who might have the slumped shoulders and arms down. It's more of posture. A person that slumps shoulders, hands down, maybe even head down, tells you a lot about their emotional state and where they are in just day-to-day life. They're defeated, they're broken people. The people with eyes, towards the heavens, hands lifted up, is a much different posture. It's not one of uncertainty, but it's one of just exalting God and being thankful to Him. So when you see people in worship with their hands raised, it is, again, one of those things. It is a matter of posture, but it's a posture that gives a good indication of where a person's life and heart is. And again, it's not, sometimes it becomes almost demonstrative, and it's almost something that people would expect. If people are watching me around church, they probably don't see me do this all the time. And it's not because I'm defeated. It's just because it's one of those things when it's one of those things that the Lord really kind of, if you will, moves upon my heart and my life, and I really track with what's being sung in the song, perhaps I'll do that. But there are some people that, man, the moment that they open their mouths, their hands go up, which is great. If that's what the Lord's doing in them, once again, it's a posture thing. And it is an expression of a freedom that they have in their worship. Then the second part of this, he says, and I will meditate upon your statutes, the things that God has communicated. And the idea of meditation, we've mentioned this before, is not how we might think in the New Agey sense, where you basically check out your mind and you're not fully engaged in the process of considering what it is that you're doing or saying. So we want to make sure that we're really, really careful when it comes to this topic and this matter of meditation. It takes an active, engaged mind to be able to meditate on things. So let's make sure that when we read these things of meditating or contemplating that's used in the text, the problem that we've run into through the centuries is that people somehow think that meditation and contemplation is an emptying of the mind and that it's not part of the active mind. Believe it or not, if you're not familiar with this, much of the church believes in what we would call spiritual practices like spiritual formation, spiritual disciplines. They all basically mean the same thing, but they're a way that a person believes that they are to alter in some ways their mind through meditating and through contemplation that really kind of almost goes more towards the subconscious than the conscious. In this case, David is not advocating for some mindless thing like you find in the New Age where you're emptying your conscious mind so that you can get to the subconscious. That's what the New Age does. That's what the Eastern cults are about. The church should be eyes wide open, fully engaged, and this idea of contemplation and meditating is to take every bit of your mind and every resource that you have in you to fully grasp what God's communicating to you. So that takes active, vibrant, alive, paying attention kind of mind. You will never understand God's word by checking out mentally and trying to get into the subconscious. The idea that that is promoted in churches boggles my mind because it's completely unbiblical. As far as David is concerned here, this meditation, or when he uses the word contemplate, active mind, working your way through it, leaving no stone unturned, and it is just that, again, you're aggressively seeking out what is the intent, what is the meaning behind the words that are being spoken here. So as we move on to the next one, I would basically say it this way: as we study through this, I don't want to do this in just some cursory way of just reading through it without really kind of considering what David is saying here. If we're going to meditate or contemplate on this is one of those things we might read a verse here or there and just sit back in our chair and go, that is profound. And then we allow the word to work through our minds. Might even pop up in our minds something that we've read somewhere else in the text, and we want to actively pursue understanding just what God is saying. So this is what it takes for us to look at God's word and realize, it really does take an active, engaged, and a consideration kind of a mind. I want to know exactly why God says what He says, and I'm only going to do that actively by seeking and learning. So we make to verse 49 through verse 56. And this is the letter Zayin. Verses 49 to 56 says, "Remember the word to your servant upon which you have caused me to hope. This is my comfort in my affliction, for your word has given me life. The proud have me in great derision, yet I do not turn aside from your law. I remembered your judgments of old, O Lord, and have comforted myself. Indignation has taken hold of me because of the wicked who forsake your law. Your statutes have been my songs in the house of my pilgrimage. I remember your name in the night, O Lord, and I keep your law. This has become mine because I have kept your precepts." So the closing verses 54, 5, and 6 really are kind of one continual thought, and we'll pick that out when we get there. But as we look at the first part of this idea of remembering your word, this request that he has, it means, God, the things that you have promised, this word to your servant, he's asking God, call these things to mind. And it's not remembering like, did you forget? It's like, now is an appropriate time for the things that you have promised in times past, Lord. Would you call them to memory that you might bring them to pass? So whatever it is that he is hoping for, or whatever it is that might be going on as he's thinking through this, the idea that God has made promises and that they might be something that at a particular point in time, a particular circumstance would get to be, Lord, I know that you've said this. May this be the case. Would you remember what you've said and bring it to pass? So that's his mind in this. Remember the word to your servant upon which you caused me to hope. So whatever it was that God had promised, this was a thing that gave him that expectation, that hopefulness, that God would bring him through it. Now, he doesn't give us the details, so we can't really speculate, but we certainly understand this in the broadest sense, that there may be times that God has communicated something to us by his word. We read something and it just absolutely settles in our mind that, this has direct application to something that I have been going through, will be going through, whatever the case may be. And you find yourself in recollection of that particular passage and what God said he would do through it. And this is that idea of remembering. Lord, as I've read what your word had to say and you've really settled it in my mind by the Spirit, now is that time, and I'm asking that you draw it to recollection because it gave me such hopefulness then. May it come to pass. So he says, this is my comfort in my affliction, for your word has given me life. So not only did it give him hope, but it has given him life as well. And that recognition that there are times when he says, my life has been brought to the point of death. Well, here it's the complete opposite side, that the things and circumstances of life can bring him to that place of real despair. In this case, it's this is my comfort. He has comfort even in the midst of affliction, which again, very important thing that we remember, because comfort is a consolation. And when you read comfort, think, you've consoled me. There's been a time of real distress in my life. This affliction is like it's trouble and it's misery. And, we want to be able to look at this and say, yeah, for the life of the believer, that can be the case. We might look at this and as far as David is concerned and say, well, wait a minute, this is the king. How does the king have trouble and despair, and how does he have all kinds of things in affliction? And, why does he need comforting? Why does he need consolation? I mean, he only answers to himself. Read the man's life and read the things that he went through before he became king and after he became king. This was a man who had just enemies coming from everywhere. And there were times that he found himself in just absolute distress. And so again, the idea of having God's word as a source to bring comfort even in the worst of times, this is what David is talking about. This is my comfort whenever affliction comes. Your word has given me life. That's the finished product, if you will. I will have life because of what you've promised. Verse 51. The proud have me in great derision, yet I will not turn aside from your law. Now, the proud, these are just the people that are arrogant, they're presumptuous. Whatever trouble David might have, oh, it's because God has forsaken him, or this, that, or the other thing. Things have overcome. He's being punished by God. These people that are just throwing out one thing after another, and the arrogance and the presumptuousness of people, and this idea that they hold him in derision. This means that they're mocking him in an open sense. They're casting, whatever they want to say about him. These are the circumstances around him. The proud, whoever these people are, these arrogant, presumptuous people, they have me in great derision. They hold him in a place of total, absolute contempt. Yet, he says, I did not turn aside from your law. So even with the things that they said, it never culminated in me ever kind of looking the other way or being disobedient to what your word had to say. He says in verse 52, I remembered your judgments of old, O Lord. So that idea of I've brought them to mind. As he's asked earlier in this, he's asked that God would be reminded. Well, he wants to remind as well. I remembered. So I brought to recollection your judgments of old, the things that God had communicated to him. And I have comforted myself because of them. Now, he doesn't say because of them, but clearly that's the intent here. Once again, application to us here and now. If we take the time, and I certainly hope that we do, whether it is actually opening up the pages and reading, or if it's remembering the things, bringing to mind because God has helped us to remember what the Scripture has to say, that on a case-by-case, situation-by-situation case, God can have us go through a particular thing. But if we will come to His Word, whether reading it directly or remembering it because He has shown it to us, the end result is that there would be comfort that comes from it. I find in times of being troubled, going to God's Word will bring about comfort. David would say that. I would hope that any of us could be able to say it as well. And that, it may be something as simple as this. I know that every single day, if I'm paying attention to it, the world will want to try to break me down, give me reasons for hopelessness. Again, our world is crazy messed up right now. But for the believer, based upon what the Word has to say, here's what the Word says. This is only for a time. We will get to the point when these things will not matter anymore, because we will not be here in this limited capacity of this temporal life. We will be in a place of eternity. So whatever the world can throw against us here and how miserable it can potentially make us, the Word would tell us it's only for a time. And if we get to that place of saying it's only for a time, here's a simple question: doesn't that just bring about in you a matter of comfort? And so, of course, it should. Now, verse 53 says, indignation has taken hold of me because of the wicked who forsake your law. So this indignation, it's an interesting word, and really it kind of means it creates in him that burning fearfulness, that sense of horror, and that sense of I guess you could say some foreboding, horrible thing. And so it says that it's taken hold of him, and that means that he's just gripped by it. So whatever it is that is said here, we just genuinely do not understand what it is. So a person's taunts and everything else, things that people might say, don't really have this kind of an effect on us. But there are times when David really could have felt a mortal fear, like I'm in horror if what is being said against me, if it's ever able to come to fruition, it would be the end of me. And I think of things like Psalms. I'm thinking of guys like Saul, people like Absalom. There were other people who wanted him dead and made threats. And if they had been able to do what was in their heart and mind, it would have been the end of David. So, he doesn't specify what it is, but we can certainly look through his history and his life and say there are those times. And so even if, I've never been in a place where I could say, I've never felt mortal danger from an enemy in this life, especially because of who he is. Clearly, that's what's caused the problem, because look at the second part of that. This indignation that's taken a hold of him, it's gripped him, it's all because of what? The wicked. the ones who forsake your law, putting them in a totally different category from him. He, unlike them, does not have a problem with what God's law has to say. And for that very reason, more than likely, this is where he's getting at, because I have honored what your word has to say, these people have stirred themselves up against me. And the horror of that and the fearfulness that comes from it, the burning of fear and genuine dread has taken hold of him. It's gripped him. And he says it's all because of these people. So it goes on, and really kind of think you can say really from here to the end of the chapter, he's able to say, how do you get from that place of being in place of mortal fear to a place of freedom? He says, your statutes have been my songs in the house of my pilgrimage, meaning the things that you've said, they're the reason why I sing. And we know that David was, again, a poet. The idea of giving the psalms that he would create, the words from his mouth were turned to music and turned to songs. And so this, again, your statutes, they have been my songs. And it's an interesting thing, because it's that idea that the things that God has promised to him, he's turned them into reasons for worship, reasons for song. And again, I'm reminded of my early years around Calvary Chapel. It was actually singing songs that people had written based upon what they had read in the scriptures. And so much of the Psalms that we read are found in the 70s and 80s Jesus people movement, 60s, 70s, 80s. All the people that come out of that time wrote music based upon the time that they spent in God's Word. So he says this, your statutes have been my songs in the house of my pilgrimage, and that idea of sojourn, moving through this life into the place that you're taking me ultimately. He recognized, even as a king, and as great as he was just passing through. This was his place of sojourn. It was his place of pilgrimage. And the things that God had promised in his word, they gave rise to his song and his worship. He says, I remember your name in the night, O Lord. And that's like at times when it's not convenient, that even at times when he wakes in the middle of the night, or if he's up at that particular time, still at that point, his mind is dominated by the word, because he says, and I keep your law. So even at times that are just inopportune, as most people would think, if he's awake, he's considering the things that God has promised, and he dwells upon those things. And he says, in a culmination of these verses that we've just read, that's why I say there's a few times when they link together. He can't get all the thoughts out in just one verse as he can in some other places. And the culmination of it is, he says, this has become mine. So the things about the songs being in his house of pilgrimage, remembering the name of the Lord during the night, keeping of the law, these things have become, I possess them, they belong to me. And he says, because, and here's why, I have the comfort I can get past all of these things because I have kept your precepts. So again, that means that God has communicated to him, how can you, David, walk in fellowship with me, God? I've written these things that you could know that. So that even in the times of trouble and distress, in the recollection of God's word and the promises found therein, there can be comfort, there can be peace in the midst of turmoil, and it's because he reflects back on God's word. So, for us here in this time in the church, let's take it upon ourselves to recognize that going through this world and all the things that are presented to us with all of the distractions, all of the difficulties, and let's just be honest, this world is dominated. This is a time that the devil has a lot of room to maneuver in this world, and it can really become a distressing place for any variety of reasons. What we want to find is the hopefulness and the comfort and the peace that comes from spending time in God's Word, being reminded of those things, clinging to the promises, praying that God would bring to mind those times when he promised comfort to us, when comfort otherwise could not be found. So as would David say these things, as we read them and as we understand them conceptually, then we want to be able to say, how do I put that in my own words? Or how do I embrace what he's embraced here? How do I make his thoughts something that really gravitate into an understanding in my own mind, and how can I be comforted by what I'm seeing here and what he's saying. It's that idea of internalizing what he's saying and making application to our own lives. So in the last of these, the letter is Het, and it's verses 57 to 63. And once again, as you look up there on the screen, you'll see that for the most part, the English does track pretty well with the Hebrew. So when you look at the lettering, and again, you'll always notice that every time the Hebrew begins with that letter of the alphabet, and I think I've mentioned it before, but it's ultimately this. It's like us trying to write some poetry, if you will, and it has these elements. It is always going to be reflective of what we've learned and how God's word sustains us, but it's like we would start the first 8 verses with the letter A, the next 8 verses with B, and then all the way through the alphabet. That's what David has done here. So you'll see always in every one of these instances, the very first word of that verse begins with the letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and sometimes it will be the first letter in English, though not always. As you see in verse 64, it doesn't go that way. So in this, let's read verses 57 to 63. You are my portion, O Lord. I have said that I would keep your words. I entreated your favor with my whole heart. Be merciful to me according to your word. I thought about my ways and turned my feet to your testimonies. I made haste and I did not delay to keep your commandments. Those verses are kind of linked together, and we'll get to that. The cords of the wicked have bound me, but I have not forgotten your law. At midnight I would rise to give thanks to you because of your righteous judgments. I am a companion of those who fear you and those who keep your precepts. The earth, O Lord, is full of your mercy, so teach me your statutes. So the first one, you are my portion. And it's not a phrase that we would use very much, but what could a person have in this world that we would be able to say, this is my lot in life, this is my portion, this is what's been given to me, this is what I have? In this case, he doesn't see it in the material sense, but rather it's that the Lord is my portion. Now, the thought is very similar to what God said about the tribe of Levi. When he was giving land to the different tribes of Israel, he said, as far as Levi is concerned, they're not going to be given land. They're my inheritance. So these would be the people that would serve the Lord. They're not going to till the land. They're not going to raise livestock. They're not doing that. They're going to be the ones who serve me. So it's more like they're what my allotment is. They're the ones who are going to serve me. It's almost along those same lines, that idea of portioning, what it is that is given to us or what it is that we have. So here David says, of the portions, the things that I could have in this world, Lord, you're that portion. You're the one who I have. And it says, so I have said that I will keep, or that I would keep your words. So being that you are mine, you're my portion, you're my allotment, I am going to be obedient to what you've asked. I've entreated your favor. And again, this words that we don't use that often, but I've sought it out. I've entreated your favor with my whole heart. So this is what he's asking in reply to it. So be merciful to me according to your word, or in agreement with what your word has to say. So the word, as he says this, since it's in agreement, mercy is what he expects. But again, notice the inclination of his life. I've entreated your favor with my whole heart. And that really helps us to understand that God has said, if you want to walk in fellowship with me, if you want to be in a place of right fellowship where there's no distance with us, then be obedient to the word. And so here David has said, I've entreated you. So it's that seeking after that. I've implored you that you would show me your favor. And he's done this wholeheartedly, not half-heartedly, not just when it's convenient, but at all times. And so be merciful to me according to your word. That means that David knows that that is a promise and it's been offered to him. So he says, I thought about or about my ways. I considered my ways, and I turned my feet to your testimonies. Isn't that an interesting thing? So that means that David, because of his understanding of what God has given in testimonies or his written word, those things that God has communicated, I thought about it. It means I looked to see if the things that I do matched up with what I should be doing according to your testimonies. So he says, I thought about those things. And once I thought about them, here's what he said: I turned my feet towards your testimonies. I saw that there wasn't necessarily alignment there. So I made correction to be in line with your testimonies. And so, along the same lines, I made haste and I did not delay to keep them, to keep what are your commandments. So just what an amazing thing. And I would love to be able to look at this in a New Testament kind of a sense. That idea of being able to say, well, I know what your word has to say, God, and then I started to size myself up in accordance to it. And when I realized that there was an imbalance, I adjusted to come in your direction to do those things that you would have me to do, rather than what I had been doing, where David here sees, and any of us could do the same thing. We might find that we're off on some things. But since God has put them in place that we could know what is acceptable, we make alterations accordingly. So that idea of making haste and not delaying. Oh, I see what your word says, and I'll get around to fixing that. Well, we can always find excuses not to do what we know we're supposed to. In this case, David says of himself personally, I made haste and I did not delay to keep your commandments, what you have instructed me to do. So how telling is this? And how challenging is it for us as well, that we would be able to say, I know what your word says. I know it expects obedience. I understand its meaning. And so the question would be, I'll get around to it. Or is it like, God, as soon as you've made me aware of it, I want to be compliant and hasten to bring those things about. Just really, really cool. Verses 59 and 60 are something that we should really, as believers, just go, gosh, Lord, may this be me at all times. This is where we should be. So he says, the cords of the wicked, they have bound me. This is the idea of that his enemies have, the wicked here, have laid a snare for him. And the cords, these are the bindings. They've caught me. I've been caught in a snare, is a good way of kind of thinking it. But I have not forgotten your law. And so the trap that's been set for me, that's something that's engulfing me, even though this has taken place, I do not get in the place of forsaking what your law has said or forgetting it. I haven't put it out of my mind. He sees that that's ultimately the remedy for the people who try to lay a trap for him. The best way to avoid it is to depend upon the Lord and let him open your eyes to what that trap is. And that's how it would be for us as well. So once again, this idea, at midnight I will rise and give thanks to you, something that ordinarily people would not do. You don't go at the inopportune times. At midnight, people are wanting to sleep. Here, David says, no, that's not important. At midnight, I will rise and give thanks to you. Why? Because of your righteous judgments. That idea that when I'm awake, reflecting on the idea that God has given us not only what he would want us to know, but they are right and they are honorable and they are good. So I will rise up whenever, even at the most inconvenient times, and give thanks to you. Just wonderful the way that these are put together. This too, the idea of fellowship among the believers. I am a companion of all who fear you and those who keep your precepts. The idea that there is a community, or whatever you want to use for it, a fellowship. I've said this so many times, and I think we probably all get this. There are things that we see as the believers, in this case with us in the New Testament sense, believers in Jesus put us in a relationship with other fellow believers that's even closer as a bond than family. It can be. It's supposed to be, because these are people with whom we will spend eternity, and it's not always the case with our families. Sad to say, it's a distressing kind of a thing to say, but unless people are born again, they are not going to have an eternity with us. I would have more in common with a believer than I would with even people in my own family if they're not believers. So that idea, I'm a companion to those people. I may never have met them, But as David would say here, I have a commonality with them. They're companion to me. They're of like mind. These are people that are of common belief. And then at verse 64, the earth, O Lord, is filled or full of your mercy. And so, being the case, then help me to learn that. Teach me then your statutes, or those things that would prove that. So recognizing the mercy of God and how it's there for him to see everywhere. The earth is filled with it. And I guess if we were kind of looking at it in this sense, God has every reason to just wipe out everything that's on the planet. No one merits his favor. No one is in a place just by birth of being acceptable to him. And every person, even the most right-on believer in our times, still fails him. And yet the fact that God allows us to come to him and seek forgiveness, or even those people who do not seek him out, even now, God shows mercy to them because they've really brought about on themselves judgment, but God defers that to another time. So everywhere you look, the Lord is a merciful person and allows life to go on, and yet it won't be indefinite. The day is going to come when God says enough and he will judge this earth. But right now he's not doing that, and it's been going on for thousands of years. Men who live in rebellion and wickedness, and even us as believers who fail him daily. Nonetheless, we are not consumed. So he is merciful. So David says, as I observe that world the way that it is, would you teach me to understand it going forward? It's a day-to-day kind of a thing. It's a pursuit. It's our walk with God. So really, really fascinating bunch of verses here in these three sections of Psalm 119. And so if you have any questions on any of what's been shared today, then please contact us through the ministry's website at oldpaththeology.net. And again, we love being able to put up the things here on the screen. And if you have any questions about that, I want to thank my good friend Glenn Boyer, who put these all together and has allowed me to make them available to you. If you'd like to, I'm sure he didn't mind if you screenshotted them just so that you have them. It's a brilliant construction that David has come up with here, and it's wonderful that we get a chance to look at it and kind of marvel at what God had shown him and how his heart is poured out to the God that he loves and favors. So with that, we will pick up next week, starting at verse 65, and we'll get through another 2 or 3. We'll just see where time takes us.